Hi, everyone. This is Martin Willis with Podcast UFO. Looks like we made it through the Mayan disaster. The end of the world is not here. I've heard some say that it must have been a typo on the calendar. Anyway, I'm glad we're all here, and welcome to episode number 31 with John Lear. It's only about a 20-minute segment today. I hope you enjoy it. You can follow us on Twitter, or you can like us on Facebook, and those icons are right on our website. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy the show. I'm on Skype with John Lear. How you doing, John?
Real good, Martin. How are you doing?
Great. And you're in, where are you, in Las Vegas?
Las Vegas, Nevada, yeah.
Your father was the founder of the Learjet company, beautiful jets, a symbol of status. And I just wondered, what gets you interested in going down the path of ufology to begin with?
Well, the first thing I remember is in 1947, we had a house in Palm Springs, or not Palm Springs, Palm Desert, which was just down the road from Palm Springs. Mm-hmm. And it was pretty desolate. And somehow that book from, I think, Ruppelt or somebody wrote a book about UFOs. And I remember reading it and being intensely interested in it. The next thing that I remember is when I was in the Cub Scouts, we were over at this guy's house, and I was laying on a hill watching the sky, and I saw something go across the sky in 3 seconds. It was just a light and left a thin trail that instantly disappeared. And so I looked around and said, "Did you guys see that?" And everybody kind of looked blankly at me, and nobody had seen it. Then the next thing I remembered was many years later, I was descending in a Learjet into Los Angeles International, and I was over Banning Pass. In a descent, 33,000, I saw an object go from left to right, from in back of me to in front of me, and it looked exactly like the M2F2, which is referred to as flying bathtub, or that plane that the $6 million man crashed in, if you remember back that far.
Oh, I do remember that, yeah.
And when I saw it, I thought it was the M2F2. I even went to the trouble to call the chief pilot at Learjet when I got on the ground and say, "Hey, you'll never guess what I saw." Only years later did I realize how ridiculous it was to think I saw an airplane like that over the approach corridor of Los Angeles International. There's no way they would be testing there. They would be way north up at Edwards Air Force Base.
You have flown all kinds of jets. You've won all kinds of awards, I believe, as a pilot.
I held at one time 17 world records for speed in the Learjet. And also I hold a number of certificates which the FAA issues you for various disciplines, like being a navigator, being an aircraft mechanic, being a control tower operator, that kind of stuff.
I see. At one time, did you actually fly for the CIA?
Yeah, I flew for Continental Air Services in Southeast Asia. They were under contract with the CIA to do the same stuff as Air America was doing in Laos and Vietnam. And I did that for about a year. And then I flew various missions that were CIA sanctioned in the Middle East and Africa.
Mm-hmm. Now, Lima Site 20A, Richard Doty had claimed that he was there at one time. Did you ever meet him there?
No. What rank was he?
I'm not really sure at that time, but he claimed that he was there at the Lima Site 20A. I just wondered if that was a place that you flew into?
Yeah, that's where we got our daily briefing. We were overnight and stayed in Vientiane. And then every morning we get in the airplane and we'd fly about 30 to 45 minutes north into this 20 alternate, and we get our briefing. The actual name of the building was Sky, S-K-Y. So you referred to it as I'm going to Sky.
Mm-hmm. And had you ever met Richard Doty at a later time? He was involved in the Benowitz case.
Yeah, no, I never met him. I heard a lot about him. This is the first time I ever heard that he had been at 20 alternate.
Yeah, that was a claim I believe that he had made on some blog site or forum, from what I understand.
It'd be interesting to know in what capacity he was there.
One of the things that I saw a documentary quite a while ago was one with you talking about Bob Lazar, and I know that you had, I believed he was involved in a real estate appraisal at your house or something when you first met him. Is that right?
Yeah, Bob Lazar had a friend called Gene Huff, and Gene called me one day, and he wanted a copy of all my UFO tapes. I had some the Billy Meyer tapes and some other tapes, and he offered me. He said, "I'm an appraiser, and if you'll give me a copy of all your tapes, I'll do an appraisal for your house." So I said, "Okay, we'll do that." So when he came over to pick up the tapes and start the appraisal, he brought with him a guy to hold the end of the measuring tape, and that guy was Bob Lazar. And Bob Lazar at that time didn't believe in UFOs in any way, shape, or form. He told both Gene and me that he had worked at Los Alamos, he had the highest clearance he could get, but he had never seen anything of that nature or read anything of that nature.
And then yet later on, he claimed that he actually started working at Groom Lake. And there was a situation I heard in one of the shows where you mentioned that on a Wednesday evening, you went out, and right when he said there would be testing, you actually saw a dome-shaped disc or something?
That was March 21st, 1989. I was over at his house, and he said he was already working up at S4, and he said, "They're going to test fly tomorrow. Do you want to go up and watch?" And I said, "Yeah, but how can we watch without violating security?" He said, "Well, there's a dirt road to the northeast of Groom Lake, and we can get pretty close without violating security, and they test at 9 o'clock, so if we get there about 8:45, we'll be okay." So I said, "Yeah, I'd like to do that." So that was the March 22nd, 1989, me and Gene Huff and Bob and Bob's wife drove up there. No, Bob's wife didn't come that trip. And we parked on the road about 12 miles northeast of Groom Lake and started setting up the telescope, and we saw in the distance this bright light. You couldn't see any definition of shape because it was too far away. So I started setting up the telescope, and just as it stopped motion and started going down or going vertically down behind the mountains, I got the telescope lined up and saw, in fact, it was a disc, and it was radiating a gold or yellowish kind of substance. And I watched it for a few seconds, and then I pulled away to let Gene Huff look. And as I stepped away, I hooked my foot around one of the tripods and moved the scope, and he didn't get to see it.
Speaking of Bob Lazar, there is a lot of ufologists who have done a lot of research, and there's a lot of speculation that Bob Lazar was a fraud as far as the whole story goes. And I know you were good friends with him. I just wondered have you come to any different conclusion over the years?
Yeah, my personal opinion, he's not a fraud. He when I first met him, he didn't believe in UFOs. It took us 3 or 4 months to get him interested enough that he would apply for a job at Groom Lake to his friend, the father of the H-bomb. Forget his name now. But anyway, I was there when he made the call, and he got 3 interviews over the next 2 months. And the next thing I knew, he was sitting at my desk on a December, I think it was 6th, 1988, and he says, "I saw a disc today." And I said, "What?" And he said, "I saw a disc today." And I said, "Theirs or ours?" He said, "Theirs." And I said, "Well, what are you doing here?" I said, "Why don't you find out what's going on? Because they've obviously followed you. Why don't you find out what's going on and then tell me?" He said, "No." He said, "The truth is, I've seen you take so much crap over the past few months, and I've seen it, I've touched it, I know it's true, and so I'm coming forward to tell you that, yes, it's true, that everything you said is true." So that was the December 6th, and that was when the first day he went to work up at Groom Lake.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people have looked into his educational background, and it just doesn't come up to snuff with the positions that he claimed to have had. So I know there's still a lot of controversy about that. Are you still in touch with Bob these days?
Yeah, Bob lives in, I think it's Bainbridge, Michigan, and I think he's the 3rd or 4th largest distributor of scientific supplies to schools and universities. And because of the economy, he's downsizing now. He's moving into a smaller warehouse. He was going to come to my birthday party last Saturday or Sunday, but because of this move, he just couldn't make it.
As far as Paul Benowitz, now you actually knew him, or you actually spent a few days at his house. Is that correct?
Yeah, a guy named Chris Lambright introduced me to Paul, and we became good friends. I stayed at his house 2 nights and listened to his stories, and he was a really interesting guy. The unhappy thing about it was 3 weeks before he passed away, which was about, I think, 10 years ago, he called me here in Las Vegas and said, "John, I'd like to see you." And I couldn't get the time. I was flying cargo at the time and couldn't get the money to take an airline there, and I wasn't able to go. But I've always regretted that because I always wondered what he was going to tell me.
Wow. There was some speculation that after you had left that he was angry at something. And do you have any idea what that might have been about?
Angry at me?
Not necessarily you, but other people that he was in touch with. He kind of isolated from that point on. Changed his phone number, things like that.
Chris Lambright told me that he was angry because he told me everything that he knew, and he thought that I was going to take it direct to Congress and get some resolution on this matter, because he felt we were very close to be taken over by the Greys, and he wanted help. But as it turns out, nothing much happened, and Paul Benowitz was ticked off that I hadn't done anything about it.
I see. Mm-hmm. Well, that's interesting. Now, there was also speculation the underground bases in Dulce, New Mexico, was kind of something that was thrown at Benowitz to kind of get his thoughts off of what was happening really close to home. Do you have any insight on that?
Well, they definitely, Paul Benowitz was the first one to come up with Dulce, not them. And he did so by the interviews with, I'll have to remember her name in a second.
Was it Ann West?
No, Ann West lives in Henderson, Nevada, and she was the one that was in contact with the security officer that had the videotape and black and white photos from Dulce. The person I'm thinking about, that was the lady that came to his house, and he did the abduction research on it, and she had been taken to Dulce, and I think that was the first any of us had heard about Dulce. And Leo Sprinkle was there. They all got together and they did it, and I actually have in my files right next to me the original handwritten notes of the abduction of what's her name and all the stuff that happened to her inside Dulce. So I've heard that Doty and maybe Bill Moore and stuff like that put that into Benowitz's head, but if they did, then how come he was the first one to come out with all of this and actually get it on record with Leo Sprinkle?
That's right. I heard you're right. In the beginning, he did have some time up in the northwest corner of New Mexico, saw something, and from what I understand, it's possible that when he related it to people like Doty kind of took it and went a little bit further with it, that type of thing. I'm not really sure of the facts. Another thing I wanted to ask you about is the Krill memo. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, when I first got together, first really getting deep into this UFO stuff, there was a guy that worked at Nellis Air Force Base. He was a sergeant, and he came to my door and wanted to know if he could help. And he showed me some of the research he had done, which included some of the stuff on Bentwaters. And so to make a long story short, we became good friends and did a lot of research. And he wanted to write an estimate of where he thought we were as far as research on aliens at that point. And so he wrote this 10 or 15 page, maybe it was less than that, of the situation. And then he told me, I'd like to distribute this, but I can't use my name because I work with the Air Force and I don't want it to become a problem. So he said, can you think of a name we could use? And I immediately thought of this alien that the Pentagon had been in touch with at the Pentagon, whose name was Krill, Krll. And I said, but we'll change the spelling to Krill. And he said, okay, good. And what about a first name or initials? And I said, I don't know, it's up to you. And he picked OH out of the thin air. But later, Bill Cooper said that OH stood for original hostage when, in fact, we just pulled those initials out of thin air. And that's where OH Krill came from.
The paper was more or less a hoax. Is that what I'm understanding?
A hoax?
Yeah. Was this paper?
No, it was an estimate of the situation of where John Grace and I thought we were at the time as far as our research. It was not a hoax. It was information. We were just trying to figure out how best to get it over so it would be believable.
Who were you trying to convince with this letter?
The public, the people that were interested in UFOs.
Okay.
Well, when I went to Dulce to do my own research, I drove there and checked into the hotel there and phoned Gabe Valdez, who was the head of the highway patrol there, to introduce myself. And he said, well, I know who you are, John. Don't you remember me? And I said, oh, how? He said, maybe about 15 years ago, Dean Martin was filming a movie here, and he needed some fresh steaks and his girlfriend to be flown here. And you flew him here for him. And I remember that at the time I was flying for Lacey Aviation, and I flew a Learjet into Dulce with Dean Martin's girlfriend, and the fresh steaks that he wanted. And Gabe Valdez was the guy who met me at the airport, who was going to take all that stuff to Dean Martin on the set. So anyway, we got to be good friends, and he invited me on one of his patrols, which at night started at 10 p.m. and ended at 6 a.m. And we drove around the mountains there for 8 hours while he told me about all the weird things that happened in Dulce, which were, a lot of mutilations, strange things to see, things that the Indians wouldn't talk about, all that kind of stuff.
Did he see a lot of strange things himself?
Well, I only drove with him on one shift, and that was 8 hours. And that started at 10 at night and ended at 6 in the morning. And he told me a lot of stories about his brother had a cattle ranch, and a lot of his cattle were being cut up. And he just told me all the stories that were going on there at Dulce.
Well, John, thank you so much for joining us, and it's been a real pleasure.
Okay, great. Call me when this goes on the air.
All right. Okay, so this is Martin Willis with John Lear, and that's it for today.